And Deputy Collins on behalf of
Thanks, Ciarán Corda. Tánaiste, we welcome the appointment of the independent external expert in obstetrics to strengthen the incident management team's investigation into the tragic death of Savita Halappanavar. Yesterday, the Taoiseach said that he would not rule out an independent inquiry into Savita's death, and we feel that that's an option that could and should still be pursued. There have been calls from the medical profession for a legislation framework to be introduced along the Medical Council guidelines. 2 days ago, Minister Riley received the expert group report. This was set up to assess what had to be done following the European Court of Human Rights judgment in the A, B and C cases. He obviously will be studying it. But can you outline when it will be published in this House? And surely it will be published as soon as possible. It has already been reported in the media that the group do not recommend specifically legislation, but discuss a number of options that will be left to government to decide whether primary or secondary legislation will be required. Now, Tánaiste, obviously this issue brings out different opinions in people and communities across the country. Debates will, unfortunately, be heated, personal and at times irrational. Every TD in this House, as we all know, has been lobbied from all sides. Hopefully, the tragic death of Savita will allow the expert group report to be debated in an open, sensible and mature manner. We do not need to create any more division than already exists out there. And Tánaiste, in this regard, we have 3 questions for you. Can you outline when the report will be published so that it can be debated in the House? When will the government be in a position to respond to it? And finally, if you intend to refer it to the Oireachtas Committee on Health. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Tánaiste.
Firstly, I want to take this opportunity to express my own deepest sympathy to the family of Savita Halappanavar. This is an appalling loss, which I think has rightly touched the hearts of all of the Irish people. It is, of course, true to say that we don't yet know the full circumstances of what happened, but I think that anybody who listened to Savita's husband yesterday has to be deeply concerned by his very dignified and moving account of what happened to Savita. I think that this is one of these moments, and I want to thank Deputy Collins indeed for the tone with which he raised this issue this morning. I think it's one of those issues when I think we are all reminded here of our duty as legislators. It's not a moment for shrill voices. It's a moment for respect, first of all, for a grieving family, for dignified discussion, and for determined action. I think we have to await the investigations which are underway in relation to Savita's very tragic death. But there are issues which we have to address and to which we need to bring legal clarity. It essentially centres around what happens in a set of circumstances where a woman's life is at risk, where medical professionals may not be entirely clear as to where the lines of their responsibilities and duties lie. And it was to address those, because these were the issues that were addressed too in the cases which went before the European Court of Human Rights. It was to address those issues that the government decided on its formation that we would establish an expert group chaired by a High Court judge, made up of medical professionals, legal experts, to look at this issue and to bring to government recommendations as to what steps we can take. That group has now reported to the Minister for Health. I understand that the Taoiseach and I will receive the report sometime today. It will be considered by government. It will, of course, be a decision for government as to whether or not it will be published. There is a timeline that we have to comply with. We're required to make a further report to the Council of Europe by the end of this month, and we will comply with that requirement. So the steps here will be that the report is in. Obviously, the Minister for Health needs to have time to consider it and to judge what issues he will bring to government arising from it. It will be considered by government. A decision will have to be made in respect of its publication, and also I think a decision will have to be made in respect of how it's dealt with in the House. But I think we all need to be clear that this is an issue. It's been 20 years now since the Supreme Court made its finding on the X case. That it is time, in my view, to bring legal clarity to this whole issue. And it was to that end that we set up the expert group, and will now deal with the recommendations and the report that it has made to us.
Thank you. Deputy Collins.
Thanks, Tánaiste, for your reply. I agree with you, it is indeed a very sensitive issue, and I think it beholds all of us as parliamentarians and public representatives to engage in an open and honest debate. And I think the people out there are demanding that debate takes place as soon as possible. You've outlined some of the timeline there, Tánaiste, in relation to the reply that has to be given to the European Court, which is at the end of this month, early December. But we have to engage with the political process. Let's be honest about it here. There are varying views within all the political parties, within all sections of society. So I think it's incumbent, and my party think it's incumbent, that we publish this report and get it out there. And let's have a full and open debate. But also, will we have a debate in this House in relation to the State's response to the European Court prior to your reporting in December? And following on from that, December, our obligation and our commitment to report back in December is the only timeline that you've indicated. Where goes the timeline after that? What are the steps that you in government intend to take us through in terms of arriving at hopefully a consensus that will bring as many people along this journey as possible? Can you outline for us that, please, with a bit more detail? Thank you.
Well, first of all, I do agree that we should discuss this issue in the House, and I think it should be discussed in a reasoned and in an informed way. I hope I didn't give you the impression that the report will not be published. It's simply that government has to make a formal decision to publish the report. I do believe that the debate needs to be fully informed. We obviously have to look at the recommendations that the group has made. That was why they were set up, to look at the different options that can be progressed, to look at the issue in its totality and complexities in it, and the discussion that we will have will be based on that report. So that's the first thing, is that the report has to be, it's just in, it has to be considered, and government obviously have to see where we go with it. The timeline is that there is a requirement to make a report to the Council of Europe by the end of the month. We will comply with that requirement. What further steps will be taken, and how the issue will be progressed, and how we will deal with it, how we will get the legal clarity that we need to have on this issue, is obviously going to be based on what is in the report. And what I would envisage is that, yes, that we will have a discussion in this House, necessary at the Health Committee of the House. I think the issue is being discussed in the general public in any event now. I think that discussion needs to be a reasoned, reasonable, dignified discussion, and I think it needs to be focused on what it is we need to do to bring legal clarity to sets of circumstances that have been outstanding for a long period of time, that are very real. We have seen, and although we don't know the full details yet until the investigations are completed, but we've heard what Savita's husband said yesterday, And I think as legislators, I think we have a duty and a responsibility to respond and to act and to deal with it.
Thank you. Deputy MacDonald.
Tánaiste, I too heard the words of the now widower of Savita Halappanavar, and his testimony was truly shocking and heartbreaking. And I think, like the rest of the country, I was not just upset and moved by what he had to say, but I was also very angry. You see, we've debated these matters for 20 years. I think this is probably the only jurisdiction on earth where urgency is defined by a delay of 20 years. I accept absolutely that there have to be inquiries into the precise circumstances of the death of Savita. We need the medical detail and we need a full account of it, so I support that. But what I fear is that yet again we hide behind reports and inquiries and we kick the issue down the road yet again. You see, we don't need a report or an inquiry to tell us that the medical profession is left in legal limbo. We know that. We don't need a report or an inquiry to tell us that as a result of that, women's health and lives are left in jeopardy. We know that. And you know, it would be very easy for us to point the finger at the Catholic Church or at the medical profession or a particular hospital or the HSE. But the blunt truth is that the limbo exists because this House has failed to legislate. We now have the 7th government that has not yet brought forward the legislation to give effect to the Supreme Court judgment. And I think that the Oireachtas shows itself as a bit farcical when we find ourselves in those circumstances.
Thank you.
Successive governments failed to act. And Tánaiste, you haven't given the kind of clarity that we now need. Why haven't you decided to publish the report? Why can't you say very clearly that legislation will be brought forward to bring effect to the Supreme Court judgment? You weren't nearly so reticent prior to the last election and for a very long time.
Thank you, Deputy.
So our sympathies are with the family and the inquiries need to happen. But we need action. It needs to be speedy. And no longer can anybody elected to this House or to your government hide behind the failures of others or reports or inquiries. We need the legislation, and I want to know, Eamon Gilmore, when are you bringing it forward?
Tánaiste.
Deputy MacDonald, my position on this issue is known for a very long time. I'm on the public record for over 25 years as to how this issue should be dealt with. There's no doubt about it. And it hasn't always been a popular position, and it hasn't always been a position that has commanded support across all parties, I would say, in this House. I was deeply disturbed yesterday by what Savita's husband said. I don't think, as a country, that we should allow a situation where women's lives are put at risk in this way. I do believe that we have to deal with it and that we have to bring legal clarity to it. As the Minister for Health said here some time ago, there have been 6 governments in this state since the Supreme Court judgment in 1992, and they haven't dealt with it. This will not be the 7th. And that's why we set up the expert group to guide us. Not a case of a report on what happened or looking into it or whatever. Let's look at the terms of reference of that expert group. It was to examine the ABNC versus Ireland judgment of the European Court of Human Rights, to elucidate its implications for the provision of health services to pregnant women in Ireland, to recommend a series of options on how to implement the judgment, taking into account the constitutional, legal, medical and ethical considerations involved in the formulation of public policy in this area and the overriding need for speedy action. The group has now reported. The report is just in. Obviously, the government is going to have to consider what is in that report. As Deputy Collins has said, we need to discuss the issue in this House. I do believe that we need to bring legal clarity to this issue as quickly as possible. And as the Minister for Health said in a Dáil debate here on the issue some time ago, this will not be the 7th government to neglect and to ignore this issue.
Thank you. Deputy MacDonald.
Well, Tánaiste, I'm familiar with your public position and the position of your party, and it's one that we wholeheartedly share and support. But here's the problem. The problem is that meanwhile expert groups meet, meanwhile reports are drafted, meanwhile inquiries, very necessary inquiries, are held, women and the medical profession remain in a legal limbo. And the case of Savita and the tragedy for that woman and her family writes large the failure of successive governments. And the ball is now in your court. You say that you wish to see speedy action. Can I remind you that your expert group is late in reporting? The report is late coming to government. And now you equivocate. Why do you equivocate? We've had a former and current master of the National Maternity Hospital on the public record now stating categorically the dilemma that medics find themselves in. They need legislation.
Thank you.
We know that. The women and families of Ireland know that. And this isn't about the broader debate around abortion. This is a very specific circumstance where medical action is required to save the life of a woman. And we have no right to equivocate on that matter. And the report ought to be published immediately. And you as government ought to make it immediately crystal clear that the legislation required to give certainty and safety will come through very, very speedily.
Tánaiste.
Well, first of all, I don't think that this is an issue or this is a day for scoring political points on this. No, please now. There is no equivocation here. I'll be clear on this. And there has never been, as far as this government is concerned. We made it clear on the day that this government was formed that we were going to address this issue. And that's why we set up the expert group. And of course you can come in. The group looked for additional time to complete its work. And you know, you can make all the fuss about delays and so on. This government is going to deal with this issue. The report has to be considered by government. I expect that it will be published. I expect that we will be debating and discussing the issue here in the House. I have said very clearly that we need to bring legal clarity to this issue. We need to ensure that in this country that we do not have a doubt which arises in a hospital, in a set of circumstances, which puts a mother's life at risk. And we also need to have, and I heard a medical professional this morning on the radio, we also need to have clarity for medical professionals who have to make judgment calls in these matters, in the real-life situation of a hospital, and the concerns that they have about making a decision which may expose them to action if somebody disagrees. And I also think that we also have to take into account the ethical concerns that some medical professionals may have in respect of this issue. And that's why, because these are the range of, if you like, complex considerations that have to be weighed up. That's what the expert group was asked to do, was to weigh all of that up. And that's why when we set up the expert group, we included medical people and legal people so that they would take that totally rounded view. They have now reported. The report will be considered. It will be taken forward. There is no question of equivocation. We need to bring legal clarity to this situation, and that's what we're going to do.
Thank you. Deputy Pringle.
Tánaiste, I would like to just take this opportunity to send my condolences and sympathy to Savita Halappanavar's husband, family and friends as well. And while these incidents may be rare, one life lost unnecessarily is one too many. And this is something that could still happen to any of our wives, sisters or daughters as things now stand. And I would like to just join the calls for the report of the expert group to be published without delay so that we can rectify this situation as soon as possible. But unfortunately, Tánaiste, the mistreatment of women under the state's care is nothing new. This week, around 150 symphysiotomy survivors travelled to Dublin for the first screening of a documentary which examined this brutal practice. And the survivors of symphysiotomy, who for many the operations were done without prior knowledge or consent, continue to call for justice and the recognition of the suffering they have gone through as a result of these barbaric procedures. For too long, Tánaiste, this state has failed women, and this must end. We must prioritise the welfare of the mother and what is best for the women from a medical perspective, so that we never see the like of these tragedies happening again. Therefore, Tánaiste, will you listen to the calls of the survivors of symphysiotomy and waive the statute of limitations so that these women can be compensated for what was done to them under the watch of the state? There has been cross-party support on this issue, but there has been no action on something which has been described as arguably the biggest human rights scandal in Ireland since the foundation of the state. Most of these women are now in their 70s and 80s and are looking for justice for the most traumatic event of their lives. Will you address and recognise the mistakes of the past? And will you commit to prioritising the well-being of women who find themselves in situations where their welfare has been put at stake? Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Tánaiste.
Firstly, I want to say that I'm conscious of the distress that symphysiotomy has caused to a number of women and recognise the pain that this issue has caused to those affected by it. The Government is committed to dealing with the women concerned sensitively so that if at all possible closure can be brought to those affected by it. The Minister for Health's first priority is to make sure that the health needs of those who have had a symphysiotomy are met quickly and effectively. The HSE provides a range of health services to women who have undergone a symphysiotomy. Patients who underwent this procedure have, on application, been granted full GMS eligibility on medical grounds. Advice with regard to pathways of care is available to women on request through the 5 symphysiotomy liaison officers in the HSE. Necessary medical expenses related to symphysiotomy in respect of medical and private treatments may also be refunded. A report has been commissioned by the Chief Medical Officer in the Department of Health. This is an independent research report into the practice of symphysiotomy in Ireland from 1944 to 1984, and the independent academic researcher, Professor Una Walsh, was formally appointed on the 1st of June 2011. The compiling of the independent research report has 2 stages. The first stage is a draft report which is based on an analysis of published medical reports and research. The draft report contains information about how frequently symphysiotomy was carried out in Ireland and compares rates with other countries. It also provides reasons why it was carried out. As planned, the second stage of the research was a consultation process which was led by the researcher. The researcher will seek feedback on the contents of the draft report from those with experience of the procedure, particularly the women concerned and health professionals. She will then use this material in finalising the report. The final report will be presented to the Minister for his consideration of any actions that may be required to address the issues concerned. The Minister is determined to bring this matter to a satisfactory conclusion for all the women concerned as soon as possible, and the Government expects to receive the report shortly.
Thank you, Deputy Pringle.
Tánaiste, we're here again in response about another expert report that has been drafted into what is a desperate situation. Tánaiste, I think that the issue here is that the state recognises the wrong that was done to these women, and that the way to do that and to allow them to achieve that is to waive the statute of limitations, to allow them to go before the courts and have their cases heard. And there is precedent there in the courts where somebody was compensated recently as well, so the courts can deal with this so that these women can have their rights vindicated. When we don't want to see another report that will drag on for years, maybe before it will be published, and we can have this issue resolved once and for all. So, Tánaiste, I would call on you again to waive the statute of limitations, allow these women to come forward and to have their rights vindicated in the courts.
Tánaiste.
Well, the purpose of the report is not to drag this on at all. The purpose of the report is to enable the government to make an informed decision about how to deal with the issue. I think the first thing is, Professor Walsh has been conducting the research on this issue and the consultation on it, including the consultation with the women, with health professionals concerned. I think we should allow that work to be completed, concluded, and then for us to make whatever decisions are necessary arising from it. But I want to assure you that this is again a case where, as a government, we have decided to deal with this issue. Professor Walsh was appointed in June of 2011 in the lifetime of this government. Her work needs to be completed, and when it is completed, the issue will be addressed and dealt with.
Thank you. That completes leaders' questions for today.